Welcome to the Women Living Well After 50 podcast. I'm Sue Carrick and I'm passionate about inspiring, motivating, supporting and informing women over 50 to embrace this exciting time of life. Health and wellness in mind, body and spirit are the foundations for living well, but there is so much more to a life well lived. Each week, through conversations with my guests, I'll be presenting topics that will help us all to live well and enjoy life. So join me as we discover new ways to become women living well after 50. Are you ready to start living? What are you waiting for? Let's get started. Welcome to another episode of the Women Living Well After 50 podcast. I'm Sue Carrick and it's so lovely to have you join me. Feeling stressed and overwhelmed? You aren't alone, especially with the way the world is at the moment. My guest today, Pam Miller, though, will share with us one surprising reason why we could be experiencing stress and overwhelm and how it affects our overall health, physically, mentally, emotionally. And once we realise the reason, it can change everything. Pam Miller has been coaching, mentoring, and serving women for the past 4 decades in the areas of higher education, college instructor, youth ministry, as a co-author of At the Feet of Ordinary Women, and as a life and health transitional coach. Pam recently retired from her full-time job in higher education and continues to help women effectively navigate and thrive through transitions in their lives. So let's go and join the conversation and find out what Pam can help us with to overcome the stress and overwhelm in our lives. Welcome, Pam. I'm so delighted that you are joining me today on the Women Living Well After 50 podcast.
I'm delighted to be here, Sue. So thanks for inviting me.
Well, it's lovely to have you. And what I really love is that you initially sent me an email and we started up a conversation because you felt that you had something to offer to the listeners. And it was great that you took that initiative to actually approach me. And I'm just looking forward to the topic we're going to be talking about today. But before we get started, I wondered if you could just share with the listeners a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Okay, great. Well, I actually just officially retired. I did have a full-time job in higher education, so I did that for 21 years. Loved working with college students. Really loved that a lot. But on the side, I've had a coaching business, and so I've just been newly retired from the full-time job for the last 2 months. So I'm really been excited just to focus a little bit more on, working with women. So yeah, so I'm a life and health transitional coach, and so what that means is I help women just effectively navigate and thrive during life's transition. So that could be, health kind of changes or personal or professional changes. And some examples could be like loss or illness of a loved one, retirement, which I'm going through right now, and then maybe relationship changes, job changes, pregnancy, birth, moving can be a big change too. And, interesting enough, like we actually go through transitions in our life every 12 to 18 months. But a lot of those are like minor changes, minor transitions. But every so often we go through some of those major ones that really just sort of stop us in our tracks. And it's really hard to just keep moving forward. We become overwhelmed, we become stressed. And we actually go through like a grieving kind of process or like a loss of identity for who we once were. And so I really just come alongside women and just really help them start moving forward. A lot of actually some of the things that we're going to talk about today, I really do focus in on my clients with my clients, but getting out of that overwhelm and stress state, because when we're in that kind of state, it's hard to see to think clearly, to see clearly. You lack direction, and you feel so overwhelmed that you can't even move forward. So, anyways, I come alongside them and help them get out of that overwhelmed state so they can start moving forward and really rediscover their authentic selves and just become more self-confident, get that energy back, that focus, and really start living in that life that they really want. So.
Yes, that's great because sometimes we do need a helping hand, don't we? And probably generations in the past have just had to put up with it and make, put
Yeah.
up with the life they've got.
Yes.
And now we've got so many resources, including people like yourself who can help us. And that's sometimes so important to just start that first step
Hmm.
into making changes. And like change is stressful,
It
and
is,
we
for
all
sure.
experience stress in you know some form or of another, and sometimes stress can be good with for us. It can sort of get those endorphins going and that
Hmm.
sort of thing. But you feel that there's one surprising reason we might not have
Yes, there
thought
is.
about that you know makes us feel stressed. So I wondered if we could just talk about that a little bit, because
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think that when I saw what it was, I thought, oh
Yeah,
yes,
surprising. Yeah. It
yeah,
is sort of
that's right,
surprising.
yeah.
Well, you're right. I mean, stress is something we all deal with for sure. And there is definitely some positive kind of stress that does sort of put that fire underneath us, but it's for the most part, a lot of us really struggle with the negative effects of stress. And it's just so important to keep our stress level down because if it doesn't, it really affects us overall in our health, physical, mental, and emotional health. It takes such a toll, it zaps our energy. And just as I was mentioning, that stress can feel so overwhelming and it really makes you almost have like foggy kind of brain. It's so hard to even think. And you want to move forward, but it's like you're not even sure what to do. And so, like I said, it can be so overwhelming. And before I actually get to that, I'll get to that. Interesting enough, since again, I really appreciate your audience because I'm actually one of those over 50 midlife women. We actually even are more susceptible to stress. We can have more of a negative toll of stress in our later years, in our midlife years. And that's really because of the decline in our hormones that really occurs during the midlife years. And so, because of that, like our support and our physical foundation is really not as strong. And so that stress hormone cortisol even impacts us even more, during the midlife years. So it's even more important, just to have that stress management kind of stress management really is key to having a healthier life. And so,
Mm.
so yes, as I was doing more research, because as I mentioned, everybody struggles with stress, and there was a time in my life a few years ago where I was really overcome with some major kind of stress going on, and so I really wanted to get out of that stress state. And so, a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, I actually started implementing in my own life here. So yeah, as I started doing the research about how stress really impacts our overall health, like I mentioned, physically, mentally, and emotionally, I saw one common reason that actually was connected to all those important areas of our health. And you're going to be surprised at it, but the surprising reason is clutter. And it's, yeah, and we think, what, clutter? But yeah, clutter actually takes more of a toll on our health than we actually even realize. And here's the interesting thing with that is, as I was doing my research, I like to look up synonyms. You would be surprised at what the synonyms of clutter are. So it is mess, disarray, chaos, overload, disorder, confusion, noise. Okay, does that tell you how, what a negative kind of what negative clutter is in our lives? So it really just shows the negative impact that clutter has in our life. So
Mm.
and I'll mention, so I'll go into the physical clutter here, unless you want to say, I'm sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
Well, yeah, no. Before we get to that, I just want to go back to the stress for midlife women, because
Yes,
I
yeah.
was when you had that, and then you've gone on to clutter.
Mm,
I thought immediately now about the sandwich generation. You know how these days there's a lot more of the midlife women in particular looking after, they're getting their children are sort of still around. They might be off at college or whatever, but they've still got those responsibilities or a career, but
hmm.
they've also got aging parents. And what do they do about that? I mean, I was just talking to my cousin yesterday, and she works full time, and her
Mm,
darling mum is very active, but she had a fall, and she's
mm,
hurt her shoulder, and they don't, unless she has surgery, so she's feeling a little bit nervous about her mum who doesn't drive, just going
Mm,
everywhere on public transport. So you've got that stress as well. And I think it's when you talked about in the mind, the overwhelm in the mind, you'll probably come to that later. But you've always got that at the back of your mind, haven't you?
correct.
Worrying about other people.
Yes. It all of that, like everything what you just said, the physical kind of things we have on us, the mental, and emotional, all our feelings. When you have a lot of that kind of negative kind of things going on, I mean, it impacts us more than we realize, and it zaps our energy, and our motivation, and we're thinking, what's happened? This isn't how I usually am, but we're trying to figure that out, and a lot of it is it's the stress and it's that sense of overwhelm, and it can really like I said, it just sort of like gets us stuck. And we a lot of times when we get so overwhelmed, we end up just shutting down because we're not even sure what to do. And so then it just actually makes the situation even worse. If we ignore something, it actually starts getting worse. And so, but a lot of times we want to do something, but we're not sure. Part of it also because we're not thinking clearly too. And so,
Mm,
and again, that's where, when you have someone along, a coach like comes alongside you, again, help the person sort of step back and start seeing the big picture and be able to point some of the things out and to get the person out of that overwhelmed kind of state so they can start seeing things clearly. And a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about today is it's actually in the first pillar. It's the first pillar of my 5 pillar proven system, which I call thriving through transitions. And it's
mm,
foundational because it's to get somebody out of overwhelm and stress so you can start moving forward towards the life that you want to be living. But when you're still in that state, it's sort of hard to do that. So no
mm.
matter how much you want to do it. So,
Yeah, and having you as a coach to, hold their hand or even just
mm,
to listen.
right,
Um,
right.
Usually people keep things internally and they don't want to talk to anyone about it. Whereas if once you feel you've shared something, it can take a load off
For
even
sure.
just for that. So you were going to talk about the physical. I
Yeah.
interrupted you before, but
Oh, yeah, it's okay. Yes.
we'll get back on to
Yeah.
that part. So I'll just hand that over to you now.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of times physical clutter, if you talk to anyone, they'll say, it's just sort of annoying. But I think people don't realize how much it actually does affect us and affects our stress level. Because a lot of times when we're in a room with some physical clutter, what it does is it actually affects our focus and our decision making abilities. And so it's really hard to focus on important tasks when there's several things sort of competing for our attention. And that's really what that clutter does. But again, a lot of times we don't even realize that's actually happening. And clutter also, the physical clutter, it actually overstimulates our brain. So again, our brain can only handle a certain amount of stimulus at one time. And so when you have clutter, it's more things sort of coming at you. And actually, research really does say for sure that clutter does, in fact, stress us out and actually exhaust us. So it really takes a physical toll on us. And, if you think about it, ideally, our home, we want it to be a place for rest and relaxation. But, if there's clutter, it's actually hard to do. But again, it, I think, and I'll just ask this for the listeners, if you've ever noticed that you're feeling more tired than normal, have you ever sort of stopped and think maybe it might be if you have some clutter in your room? Or just even like your desk, if you're, again, sometimes you hear people say, oh, I can't sit down and do my work unless I clean my desk or I clean the room. And that's because they've realized how it really impacts them. It affects our focus, it affects our productivity. And so, but I think a lot of times it's just sort of stepping back and realizing, oh, maybe that's why I'm more tired than normal. It's because it's taking more of a toll on my physical kind of health. Um,
Mm.
and so really what
Yeah.
clutter, oh, go ahead. Yes.
No, I was just going to say I get that. So hold that point, hold that thought because you
Yeah.
were talking about that. I'm I'm not absolutely perfect, but we have our home fairly minimalist, and
Mm.
whilst I wouldn't win the award for the best housekeeper, I do, I wouldn't feel embarrassed if someone dropped in unexpectedly because we do keep things in their place, and I find that when I walk into my home,
Mm.
I suddenly feel calm
Oh, that's
because
great.
I'm not surrounded. But if I come up, my desk isn't very good, as you were talking about. But that's true. If you go to an area that's got a bit of clutter around or, things all over the place, it sort of upsets your equilibrium
It
and
does.
your state
Yes,
of feeling calm.
it does. And that's good that it sounds like maybe that's just more who you are. You just want to keep that sort of like, again, things in their place. I always say find their homes kind of thing. That's what I used
Mm,
to tell my
mm.
kids when they were growing up, find their home and put them in there. But if not, it's like it's realizing, oh, maybe that is affecting me more than I realize. Because again, what clutter does, it's really like it's a barrier. It gets in the way of really the life that you want to be living, and that's really what it is. It's a barrier. Um, and so I'll just share an action step that, as I'm working with my clients, and I've actually worked with some hoarders, actually, they've told me that. So I'm not calling them that. They've actually said, I'm a hoarder, Pam. And so what I'm going to share with you is something that they've also done. But again, when I give my talks on stress and we talk about clutter, this is something I share. And so again, part of the thing, if you're already feeling stress, I want to make this to be not as stressful because sometimes decluttering can be stressful. So I'm going to be giving a way where we're going to keep it as less stress as possible because again, that's counterproductive. If you want to get less, if you want to get de-stressed. So really the step one really is just to make a list of everything that you want that needs decluttering, and that could be like different rooms. It could be your desk. It could be the papers on your desk or photos that you have laying around in a box. Maybe the bathroom, the kitchen, sometimes in the cabinets, we have more dishes than we really need. Do we need all those maybe those appliances that maybe were, pretty cool the first time we used them, but they're now taking up a lot of space in that cabinet. So, making a list of different things, and again, clothes, which can be overwhelming, just listing all of those on a sheet. And if it's a big area, maybe even just writing some different kind of smaller steps underneath. And I just want to say this right now, if this is something that um, just even talking about decluttering might feel stressful, I want to say I'm not actually talking about starting with the attic, the garage, or maybe even that closet, because that can be overwhelming. And so again, I want this to be a very practical step that your listeners can do to start making um, some progress with decluttering. So now you have that whole list. Okay, so just sort of jot them all down, and then just start maybe numbering in order. Maybe do the top five. And find what that number one priority that you want to start with. And maybe it's a small area. If this is something you haven't done for a while, I would say start with something that's manageable. And so now you got that number one area that you want to work on. Now set a timer for 15 minutes and take 15 minutes to declutter. And when that timer goes off, go ahead and stop if that's what you want to do. Or if you feel like, you know what, I'm sort of on a roll, I want to keep going. But if you want to stop, that is fine. And here is the great thing. You'll be amazed at how much you can get done in 15 minutes. It will make a difference. And and here's the other really important thing with that. I want you to sort of slow down after you finish that 15 minutes, and I want you to feel how you're feeling. Take in all the positive emotions, like feel proud, feel accomplished, feel lighter, because I bet you're going to feel lighter. It will make a difference. And taking the time to acknowledge what you've done and take in the positive feelings and really feel those, that's going to help you motivate you then to do it the next day, to set that timer
Mm.
for 15 minutes. Because, who doesn't want to have experience positive emotions, right? And so if I know I'm going to have positive emotions after the 15 minutes the next day, man, I'm going to do that. And you'll be amazed at how much you can get done in those 15 minutes. And then when you can be consistent with those 15 minutes, you're going to be start knocking those things out. And I have to tell you, like I mentioned, a few of my clients that again would consider themselves hoarders, they haven't been able to do it. I mean, declutter before we end up working together because it was so overwhelming, as you can imagine. Don't even know where to start. But they started breaking it down and I worked with them and they are still doing that 15 minutes, but they will say it made such a difference in how they felt. They could come in from work, like you were just mentioning, and feel lighter. I have an area now to sit and it makes such a difference. So it really It does make such a difference. And I always say even a 1% improvement is progress, and you can feel good about that. So that's a really
Mm,
good practical way to start working on decluttering and to get that
yeah.
stress reduced.
I like that idea about not trying to take on a huge project
Yes.
immediately, because that's the quickest way to say, oh, it's all too hard, I'll walk away. And I was thinking about the bathroom drawers or cupboards. How many of us have old makeup or
Hmm.
old skincare or all these other things that we've thought, oh, this is great, I'm going to try this or that, and you use it for a bit and then it goes in the drawer and you forget about it, and then you open it and you think, I really should do that, but it's just all too hard. So that 15 minutes, it's a little bit like when you want to start exercising.
Yeah, that's
If
right.
and
Yes.
you're not in the mood to do it, I always say, just say, I'm going for a walk for 10 minutes, and you'll find, or I'm going to do this for 10 minutes, this activity. And you'll find that once you're into that 10
Yes.
minutes, you'll say, well, I've done 10, I might as well do another five. Oh, I can do another five. And you end up doing a 20 or 30-minute
Yep.
exercise activity when at the beginning you didn't want to do it. And then at the end, you feel fabulous.
Yes, for
So
sure.
it's that sort of thing about little bite sized pieces, isn't it?
It
And
is. Yes.
also, just while I'm talking to you about that, has come to mind that you do it in bite size. And you know how you said to stop and just reflect for a moment, you do feel that sense of achievement. And I suppose your self-confidence grows too, because you go, well, I've done that, so I can do it. It's
Yes.
just a matter of doing it in little stages.
Yeah, because you can imagine, especially if it's you've been wanting to declutter for a while and you just didn't do it because it was too overwhelming. In a sense, you probably have felt like a failure. And so that has lowered your
Hmm.
self-image, your self-confidence. And so you're right. It's like, oh, I followed through. Oh my gosh. And again, like I can do this. I can do this. And so yes, their self-confidence will start growing. And like again, it's getting a taste of success. And that's why, like you're saying, the bite-sized pieces, bite-sized steps, small steps is the way to go because you're going to be able to taste success. And that's what you want because that's going to motivate you to keep on going. And again, small steps on top of small steps, it creates momentum. It builds a strong foundation and it leads to great results. But even with the 15 minutes, you're going to see some results, which is great.
Mm, mm. So that's the physical side. Let's look at another area of clutter that maybe we don't even think about, but it's when you mention it, we go, "Oh yes, of course."
Yes,
Why
right.
didn't I think of that?
Well, I think a lot of us do think about physical clutter because we know that when we say clutter, that's usually what we're thinking of. But I want to talk about mental clutter. And so a lot of times we don't think of it like, oh, mental clutter, but that's actually clutter in our mind that really causes us stress and that those feelings of like overwhelm. And so what I'm talking about is like the negative self-talk. It's the fears and worries. It's the inner chatter. It's the unrealistic kind of expectations. It might be other people's voices crowding out your voice. Maybe it was like those one line kind of wound sentences that somebody said to you years ago, maybe decades ago, that you still remember and it still plays in your mind. It says self doubt. All of that, our mind becomes overwhelmed with those to dos, that list that just goes on and on. We can't stop our mind from doing that. It's almost like having multiple tabs open on your computer, which can be overwhelming right there. But it's like you just can't stop it and it just goes and goes. You can't stop it. And that creates stress and it really weighs down your mind. And again, and it makes it really difficult to focus on tasks, to think clearly, make decisions. It affects our motivation, being productive. And then again, it increases our stress. Um, and so just to sort of tie it together, like mental clutter is really like physical clutter, rather than like cluttered items in your room, it's actually cluttered items, in your mental space, in your mind. It's a lot of that inner noise. And I mentioned how the synonym of clutter is noise. That's really what it is. It's like noise, it's chaos, which was another synonym. That's what's going on in our mind. And it really impacts how we feel about ourselves if we're having all that negativity going on because I mentioned a lot of those was like negative kind of thoughts. It impacts your feelings because our thoughts lead into our feelings which lead into our behavior and so if we're having those negative thoughts, then it'll lead into having negative feelings about yourself, and then sometimes maybe not making the best decisions then too.
Mm, mm. This week, in my newsletter, I put the focus on how unnecessary worry can rob us of joy because
Yes.
I had a situation. I'm getting better now at almost 68. You'd think I'd have it right, but anyway, I am intrinsically a bit of a worrier, but I'm more
Mm,
in control of that now. But worrying about little things that perhaps don't happen, um or you can fix, but you just think, oh my goodness, like I made this mistake and I thought, oh, how could I have done that? It was a silly mistake. Anyway, I sort of worried about it for a bit and then I thought, just fix it. So I
mm,
did what I could to fix it and then put it aside. And I thought, well, okay, that's all sorted. But, those worries can build up in our
yeah.
mind. And some of them are so trivial that we sort of blow them out of proportion.
Yeah, so yeah, an example like that, like the worries, the fears, it's the negative self-talk. I don't think we realize what we actually say to ourselves during the day. Maybe you've heard this saying, of all the people on the planet, you talk to yourself the most. And so the question is, what are you saying about yourself to yourself? And a lot of times we don't realize, just like you were mentioning, those fears, those worries, those negative thoughts, we're thinking about those all day long. I read like a statistic, okay, and I'm going to forget if it's 30,000 thoughts a day or 13,000. It was like a lot of thoughts. But if we're thinking all those thoughts and a lot of them are negative, it's no wonder at the end of the day we are exhausted. So it's like you have that negative thought, and a lot of times without us realizing, we are thinking about it. It's like on repeat over and over, and we're ruminating on it all day long. And might have started like one thought, and then at the end of the day it's now grown. It's like, I think of like when something is rolling down a hill, how it collects everything and it gets bigger on, at the bottom. Same
Yeah.
kind of thing. We might think of that negative thought, and if we've been thinking about it all day long, now it's like blown up into this big huge thing that's so out of proportion. And again, without us realizing, it's like we've taken that negative thought and we've allowed it to go down that, I call it the negative hole of or the rabbit hole of negative thinking. And it continues to grow. And then it affects, again, without us realizing, now we're feeling tired, we're feeling unmotivated. Again, it affects our mind. We can't really think clearly because we got all this negativity that's going on in our brains. Um, and so again, that's where, if we want to start having, getting that stress, relieving some of that stress, again, that stress management, sort of improving our energy, more motivation, more calmness, those are all positive kind of feelings. We need to start with the root, which is our thoughts. And so we need
Mm,
to start changing what we're thinking about so we can have more positive feelings. Again, going to the source. And so that's where we have to really, again, I think of the parallel between physical clutter and mental clutter. If you think of, um, we want to declutter. We identify the mess and we decide with clutter like what should stay and what should go. That's usually okay. Well, this is of no value anymore. Or it's broken. It's of no use. I don't need it anymore. And that's the same kind of thing with our thoughts, is when we can sort of grab a thought that we're thinking, like you did with you grabbed that worry kind of thought and you started thinking about that. And we can run it through like a little test, like, is it a kind statement? Is it a positive statement? Is it a truthful statement? Is it a helpful statement? And a lot of times we're not thinking, I mean, usually it's no for one of those. And if that's the case, we need to stop that negative thought in its tracks before it goes down that rabbit hole of negative thinking. And a way we can do that, by we stop it and then reframe it into a positive statement, one that's more truthful. And doesn't always have to be the other end of the spectrum. Let me give you an example, and sort of you already gave an example right there too with your worrying. But an example can be, and we do this a lot of times to ourselves. We can tell ourselves, I should have done such and such differently. Can become, I am doing the best that I know how. And do you hear, and you almost like hear and feel the difference? Like, I should have done. such and such differently. I'm really like scolding myself, I'm shaming, I'm blaming myself. But if I stop that and reframe it to like I'm doing the best I can, I'm actually, that's more of an acknowledging statement that I am trying. You know, um, I'm giving myself grace. It's more of a positive, kind, and affirming statement about myself. And now if I'm able to grab like that should statement, which again, I want to mention should statements sometimes are unrealistic because we put these high expectations on ourselves. So we're already sort of like trying to have these high expectations on ourselves. So when we grab, say, a should statement, we stop it in its tracks and we reframe it into something more positive and truthful. We've now allowed ourselves to have not to have the negative emotions that go with it. Now it's going to be more positive, and I'm going to feel a little better, like I'm acknowledging myself. And we really need to acknowledge ourselves more than we are because we're so hard on ourselves all the time and we criticize ourselves. But isn't that the truth? Don't you feel like most of us are trying the best we can? And we need to acknowledge that. And that's
Mm,
a positive statement right there.
mm. That's right. And talking to ourselves as if you would be talking to a friend. I
Yes,
mean, some of the things we say to ourselves or think about ourselves, we wouldn't say to anyone else. So we
that's
need
so
to
true.
become we need to become our own best friend, don't
Yes,
we?
yeah.
So we've talked about the physical and the mental. Any other forms of clutter that we need to address?
Yeah, so I call it the emotional clutter. So again, we talked about the synonym of clutter is noise. So what noise does a lot of times, if there's a noise over here, it's going to distract me and I'm going to go look over there and it's taking me away from the present moment. And you know, when we're taken away from the present moment, we're really missing what's right in front of us. A lot of times, you know, important moments in our life, like with our family and friends. And so that's sort of what emotional clutter does. It distracts us, it's that noise. And a lot of times, you know, we're thinking about the future. Our minds are in the future or like in the past. So if we're thinking about the future, a lot of times that can be the worry, the fears can come in there. If it's about the past, there's, you know, obviously there's positive there, maybe memories, but maybe there's regret too. So there's like these negative emotions. And so we really need to be intentional to be more mindful on the present because the present moment is really where peace lives. That's where calmness is. That's where, you know, we can keep that stress level down if we are trying to stay more focused in the here and now.
Yep,
And
that's.
go ahead.
I'm
Yeah.
just writing down that little quote you said. Peace lives in the present moment. So true.
Yes. I was going to mention an action step. So, you know, a lot of times it takes intention because again, we just mentioned how our mind is always going. And I think sometimes we don't realize that we're probably thinking about the future and the past. Again, it's more of like, okay, maybe sort of stopping yourself and like, where am I thinking right now? Because, you know, there's definitely a time and a place to think about the future. You got to plan. I'm not saying that. But if you're with your family and friends and your mind is off, thinking about everything else, I mean, we're missing right at what's in front of us and special moments that we're missing. And so, again, it's about being more intentional to be more engaged in the present. And a great way to do that, to try to maybe exercise and get more, to help you be sort of exercising that muscle, sort of like, again, exercising the muscle with your brain to try to catch those negative thoughts and reframe them. Same kind of thing here is to try to engage more of your senses, your five senses. So the more senses we engage, the more we have to be present oriented. You know, think of dogs and children. I mean, they are such great examples of being in the present moment and they are far from stress. They are just having a great time because they are so present oriented. They're not worrying about anything. And so, again, let me give you a couple examples. Like, you know, we know walks, and you mentioned that too. Walks are great. It's very healthy for you for lots of different reasons. But one of the other reasons is we can engage our five senses on our walk. You know, you're walking, you got your hearing, you can hear kids playing, dogs barking, smells, maybe somebody's grilling on the grill and get you hungry. You know, smell, oh, I just mentioned smells. Obviously sights, a lot of sights, you know, touch, you can touch some of the, maybe some flowers, pick some flowers if you can. Um, and then those are great things. So that is a great way if you're feeling stressed to try to like, okay, if I'm feeling stressed, how can I maybe activate one or two more senses to get me more grounded in the present? And that will help your mind from going all over and get you more focused because we can't really activate our senses and be elsewhere. It's a present oriented kind of thing. And so that's a great way. And then when you do that, it just will start calming your mind, calming your body. It's going to help give you more clarity. And you're going to have this renewed energy, again, being more present minded. And I'm going to, this is a fun way. I'll mention this for your audience here as far as walks. Have you ever heard of a color walk before?
No, I've heard of a
A color,
mindfulness
yeah, a
walk,
color
but
walk.
I've never heard of a color walk.
Yeah, so think of a color before you go on your walk. And then on your walk, notice everything that's that color. And I'll tell you what, even if it's the same trail that you have taken many times, you're going to see new things because I mean, you have to be focused on the present. So you're looking for all those colors and you're going to see more things than you ever saw. And it really helps you be engaged in the present. And it's really a fun kind of exercise to do. Um,
Yeah. Can I just say there, this is another example where we can learn from children, but my grandsons do that, but with
mm,
cars. So when they go out, they've picked a color of car that
yeah,
they're going to look for. So I'll be driving them somewhere and they'll be going, there, whatever. And they say, for example, it's a red car or something. So they have a little word that they say when they see that car. And you're right. That's I hadn't thought about that when I went for a walk, but that will help keep you focused as
it
well
does
and
keep
in the
you
moment.
in the moment. And I'll tell you what, it'll be such an engaging walk for you because you're going to feel like you really experienced that walk when you go in more focused on the present. Again, you're like I said, see some things and feel different things that maybe you've never felt because your mind has been elsewhere when you've taken that walk. I mean, we can still benefit by thinking about it, on our walks physically, but again, part of this is really being intentional to really in a sense, sort of be intentional on creating like some healthy habits. Again, the whole goal is to keep that stress down. And when we activate more senses, it really does sort of reduce that emotional clutter and that noise and keeps us more focused on the present, where, like you mentioned, peace
Yeah.
is.
Actually, it just reminds me, a few years now on Instagram, I did a 30-day color challenge.
Oh,
And what I did was every day I didn't select a particular color, but every day I went out walking and looked for something that was colorful that
okay.
brought me a little bit of happiness. And it was
Mm,
surprising that the people that others started doing it as well. And it was surprising how much color there was in our world. And then it became, oh, I wonder if I can find something unusual. So you weren't thinking about worries or that. You were, as you say, focusing on that particular little
yeah,
project. And color just brings so much joy, doesn't
it
it?
does. Yeah. Oh,
And you
that's
discover new things. You might be going on the same walk that you've done every day for a year.
yeah,
And so it takes that boredom away as well. Oh,
it
I'm going to
does.
choose a color today. And as I walk by, I'm going to tick that off. Great
Yeah,
idea.
yeah, yeah. Have fun with that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we've sort of covered a fair bit at the moment, and we are coming up towards the end of our interview. We've just gone like that, hasn't it? But what we might do is just recap the tips and action
Yes.
that you've given us so that the listeners can grab a pen quickly and write them down, or just press replay and
Okay.
and listen to it again. And then I have another question that to
Okay.
to finish up with. But also, if you've got anything else that you wanted to share with us that would be of benefit, please feel free to do that.
Okay, good. Thank you, Sue. So yeah, physical clutter. I think one, maybe just sort of notice how you're feeling around it. I think that's again, becoming more self-aware is always a great thing. Learning more about yourself. And so to start the decluttering kind of project, just make a list of maybe the top 10 things that you think you would like to start decluttering. And then start with number one, and maybe start with something not so overwhelming, something that you feel like would be more manageable because we want you to taste success. And then take 15 minutes, set the timer, and go ahead and stop after the 15 minutes and just feel really good and experience those positive emotions. And then mental clutter, we talked about just again the clutter in our mind, how it can really, stress us out, deplete our energy. It's that negative self-talk, overthinking, it's the fears and worries. And so part of it is just really slowing down and trying to catch one of those negative thoughts that you may be thinking. And again, it's going to take some intentionality because normally we don't do that. But again, the goal would be maybe trying to catch one a day, and that's progress. And the other thing I wanted to mention with that, well, I'll just say this. So you catch that negative self-talk or that negative thought, and then reframe it into a positive, more truthful statement, that you can replace it with that negative thought so it doesn't go down that rabbit hole of negative thinking. And one thing I just want to mention that I think I want to remind your listeners is a thought is just that, it's a thought. It's not a fact. Just because we think it does not make it true. And then
Mm.
we talked about emotional clutter. So again, trying to be more present oriented because that's where peace is. And more we activate our senses, the more you're going to really feel more calmness in your mind and in your body. And Sue, I think I mentioned this to you. I think initially, I do have a free kind of resource that I'd love to share with any of your readers if they're interested. It has to do with that first decluttering the physical clutter. So I've written something out that really is sort of a step by step that really will help anybody if they're like, you know what, this is something that can be overwhelming. And I sort of break it down into my handout. And so I love to share that with anybody. And it's, again, the goal is just to reduce that, help reduce your stress and sense of overwhelm and taking some small steps with the physical clutter.
Mm. Well, I will be putting in the show notes all the links
Okay, great.
so that the listeners can contact you and also check out your website, but also get that self guide as well. So that will all be in the show notes, listeners. So make sure you look for those links. So, as I said, Pam, we are coming to the end of our interview, and it's been lovely chatting to you all the way from Illinois. And I'd really love to chat to you again because I'm sure that there's more that we can dive into with even just one of those areas of clutter. So before we go, I just wanted to ask you a question that I ask all of my guests, and that is, what does being a woman living well after 50 mean to you?
Well, first of all, like I mentioned, I love your podcast. I love the emphasis on it because that's where I'm at. And the great thing about living after the age of 50, I mean, it's your time. That's the exciting thing. So much of our lives, especially at the beginning, can be focused on others, maybe our family. And so sometimes our needs can be on the back burner. And so this is sort of our time to really tap into who we want to be and actually really rediscover our true self, our authentic self, what we're wired for. And it's a great time to really step out of your comfort zone, maybe take some of those small steps, and try some new things, and see what interests might come about, maybe new passions. And that's what I've done. A lot of what I've done has actually been since age 46. Started my job in higher education at age 46, went to grad school for my master's in English, to be a college instructor at age 49. And then I went back to school at age 64 to be a life and health coach. And I love to learn. I love to be challenged. And all of this is just really, it's tapped into passion and interest and a mission that I didn't even really know was there until I got in, took some steps. And so it just really makes you more alive and just feel joy in life. And you really feel like, you know what you're here on this earth for. So yeah, the possibilities are endless. And it's never too late to really take that first step and try something new, and you might surprise yourself. It's all about learning more about yourself. We never stop learning about ourselves or learning in life, and that's the great thing, no matter what age you are.
I love that answer, and I can really relate to that. I became a personal trainer in at 64 and started the podcast in at 63 or something, and still doing things and learning.
Mm,
And I think that's the thing. We can just keep learning, and that makes life so much more interesting. I think
for
there's a
sure.
lot of things out there, and now is our time. So Thank you so much for joining me today, Pam. It's
Thank
been
you,
lovely
Sue.
to chat, and we will rebook another interview. I've still got so many questions I could ask you, but time has gotten away from us. So we'll have to do a part two, I think.
Sounds good to me. And I've enjoyed our conversation. So thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. And I'm off. I've got my one job that I'm going to do, and that's my office drawers, my desk drawers. I'm going to do that.
There we
So
go.
everyone's listened to that now. So I have to hold myself
Yeah, there's some
accountable.
accountability. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Pam.
Thank you, Sue.
Well, that was a really inspiring and motivating interview that I had with Pam Miller, and talking about clutter and emotional, physical, and mental clutter that can really bring stress to our lives. We talked about so much, and I'm actually going to be chatting to Pam about perhaps doing a little series in more depth later on in the year or early next year, because we had so much that we could have talked about there. Um, so I think our challenge for today, as I said, mine is going to be having a look at my desk drawers, because they are something that I just throw everything in. And what are you going to be doing? Are you going to select the physical, mental, or emotional clutter to address over the next week? Remember to start small and don't, so that you won't get overwhelmed. Well, that's it for today. I did want to mention that I do have a weekly newsletter that goes out called Your Weekly Boost, and that's through my Substack account. So if you go into substack.com and have a look for Women Living Well After 50, you can subscribe to that, or through my website, womenlivingwellafter50.com.au. And each week there's a weekly boost to start your week with some motivation or inspiration. So I hope you'll subscribe to that. In the meantime, that's all I have for you today. But remember to share this with a friend, because I know we all have clutter in our lives and stress, so it might help them. And until next time, remember to live well, enjoy life, and most of all, be a woman living life your way. Bye for now.